In the year 2020, we know that headlines are being made all over the world about the Black Lives Matters movement. But one of the things that seems to be missing is the perspective of police officers who are on the front lines, who do this every day, and who have thoughts and feelings that never make headlines. I'm not too sure about doing that tonight, but I think we can at least get some insight from a very impressive young man who has spent more than 20 years on the Fremont Police Force. So please welcome Captain Sean Washington. Captain, how are you?
Thank you. I'm doing very, very well. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And yeah, it's an important topic. So I'm ready to get into it and have a productive conversation about it.
Well, we thank you for doing this. And I'm going to claim you as an alumni because you did get your master's degree from our university.
100%. Go Spartans.
Very good, man. We appreciate that. Well, let's start out by talking a little bit about your background. I know you grew up in Los Angeles. Tell us about your upbringing and what made you want to become a police officer.
What was interesting, I grew up in the city of Carson, which is, on the other side of the freeway from Compton, Long Beach, that area. So it was a pretty rough area growing up, a lot of gang activity. My father was a police officer. He did 34 years at the LA County Sheriff's Department. So wow. I grew up wanting to be like my dad. And he represented, in my eyes, what police work should be and what we strive to be as police officers. So that was really my motivation growing up because, some of the images that I saw on television regarding the police that maybe were a little bit disturbing, I knew that there was another side. Because it was represented in my house with my father being an example. So that really sparked my motivation to join the profession and continue on the tradition, at least in the Washington household, of being involved in law enforcement.
Well, very cool. And one of the things I want to say up front, you are one police officer out of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands around the world. You're not speaking for everybody, but you've been kind enough to share your personal experiences and your thought process after going through what has to be the wildest year of all of our lives, 2020. You have COVID-19, the pandemic going on as we speak, and then came what happened in Minneapolis in late May. Can you talk about the George Floyd incident and how did you react to it personally?
Well, we all saw the images. I was sickened by it. I was saddened. I was disappointed. All of the emotions that a lot of our community members were feeling, I too felt that. I also felt a sense of betrayal from those officers. We have a duty to serve our community in the right way. And the community puts a lot of trust in their police officers. And I put a lot of, the badge means so much to me and thousands of other police officers around the nation. And when someone does something wearing that badge that is criminal in nature, that harms our community, it goes against what we are about as a profession and as a human being. Let's put aside the officers being police officers. You don't treat another human being that way. And so my reaction was very similar to the reaction of the community. Outrage, anger, disappointment, and sadness, because I know that a situation like that did not have to happen. I don't care, I care, but Mr. Floyd's background does not warrant his death in that particular situation. I just don't, it's irrelevant. No one deserves to die at the hands of the police like that man did. And so, in summary, it's just a tragedy all the way around. It's a tragedy for our country. It's a tragedy for that particular region. It's a tragedy for that family. And it's a tragedy for us as a profession, because we have to be better than that. We have to be better than that. So those were my initial thoughts.
And, as obvious disclosure of the truth, you and I are both African-American, so we both had the same reaction to it, but you are wearing that uniform. And how did your colleagues react? What did they say when they heard and saw what had happened?
Well, fortunately, I work at a very progressive police department, and they shared the outrage as well. There was no excuse behind what happened. Those officers' actions, there was no excuse. Fortunately, this particular incident was captured on film from many different angles. And so it was very clear what happened in this particular incident. You know, oftentimes we get various camera angles, and there's a shooting, or, you know, and we have to wait for additional information to come through before we really can paint the picture of what actually happened. But in this case, it was instantaneous. We knew exactly what happened, and we knew exactly the consequences of those actions from those officers were just way out of what you would expect from your police officer serving your community. So yeah, so in summary, they had the very similar reactions that I did. But again, as being an African-American male, I see myself as Mr. Floyd. And so he looks like me. And so there's a different connection there. It's not to diminish, you know, any other police officer that might have felt the pain of what Mr. Floyd experienced, but I see myself in Mr. Floyd. Not that I had his background and those type of things, but, you know, he looked like me. So there is an instant connection with, you know, his ultimate fate and what happened to him.
And the whole country erupted, obviously. It triggered a bunch of overdue conversations around the country, including there in Fremont, where this summer I worked with you and some of the other police officers to have a candid conversation with the community about policing and racism. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to go back to that moment again and ask you now, as a human being, watching that unfold, but you also have been in situations where you had to apprehend suspects who were or were not being violent. What goes through the police officer's mind, not the one who did that, but goes through your mind when you're dealing with a suspect?
Well, first of all, is we try to determine what level of threat, if in any, if at all, a particular suspect is. And then, so this is an instantaneous decision, and what level of force is reasonable or appropriate or proportional for that particular arrest situation. And so there's a lot of factors that go into that. Did they display a gun? Are they known to have a weapon? What's the level of resistance? All those type of things go into the decision-making. And that's why training is critical. Scenario-based training is critical to put officers through those situations so that we can be prepared for the variety of encounters that we're gonna have. And so, yes, I've been in similar situations where I have had to struggle with a suspect. And, you know, I've been in situations where I have lost the fight, for sure. But in all situations, once the subject is secure, the fight's over. And it's at that point that we have a duty to care for that individual. So to take it to the extreme, I've been on scene where we've had to unfortunately use our firearm against a suspect, but immediately start to render care and try to save that person's life. So if you can imagine the range of emotions involved in that. You just had a deadly force encounter where someone attempted to take your life. You responded. And now you immediately have to kick in and try to save that very person, that life of the person that was trying to take yours just moments ago. That's professionalism, though. That's what the expectation is, because we have to value every human life despite their actions. You have to bring it back to it's a person. And we have a duty to preserve life. That's embedded in our code of ethics. So
I appreciate that. And I'm thinking, as you're describing that, your blood is pumping, you're breathing hard, you're human. You're dealing with a human experience that could cost you your life. Talk to me a little bit, though, about the external scene. People watching, if anybody's around, can you hear them? Can you see them? Do you react to that, or do you have to stay focused?
It's a combination. I've been on scene where I've been so focused where I'm not hearing the surrounding, you know, comments and I don't even have an awareness that someone is next to me. And I've also been on scene where I have heard. And so it just depends on the situation. You know, we are human beings, so we understand tunnel vision and those type of things that your body reacts to when you're stressed. So it's a combination. But one thing that is in our benefit is for us to try to pay attention to our surroundings. For one, officer safety. And then also, we need to hear what's going on. Take George Floyd. There were many people that had concerns about what was going on. Many people saying, it looks like he can't breathe. Many people saying, why do you have to put your knee on his neck? My expectation is that officers should be hearing and reacting to that, as well as the suspect's own words. So yes, although we might get tunnel vision, we try to train ourselves to where we don't have tunnel vision so we can pick up on all of those cues that might help us make the right decision.
Very good point. That was what was going through my mind. And I was wondering back on the day, why weren't more people yelling and screaming? Help me understand what the public's role is in that situation. I'm thinking, standing on the sidelines, if I'm watching this, I'm going to yell and scream and tell you, stop that. And I'm going to approach you, trying to get your attention and try to focus on the humanity of the moment. If I do that as a person on the street, how are police likely to react?
Well, I'll tell you how they should react. And they should react by first of all, the community member, we all have a duty, right, to look out for each other. So the fact that the bystanders in the George Floyd situation were trying to get the police officers' attentions and trying to give the police officers some feedback on their actions, that is what we should expect of our community, as long as it's done in a very safe way. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're seen as interfering with the officer's actions, because then you would create another situation where the officer might have to react to you or view you as a threat, because you are now involving yourself in an arrest situation in which you may not have all of the details. George Floyd was clear, but there are many situations where there's no background for the bystanders to quickly understand, right? So if someone was running with a gun and they were grabbing for a weapon and it was underneath their body, and maybe the bystander only sees the officers aggressively trying to retrieve that weapon, they may view that as excessive force, but they don't have the context on what it is the officer is trying to accomplish. So I would my advice to bystanders would just to try to assess the situation, communicate in a very effective way, but don't escalate the situation to where you may make things worse. And so it's a very dynamic situation where it's going to require very careful thought and preparation. But I definitely would be cautious of approaching the officers too closely and trying to intervene or physically stop the officer's actions unless you're clear that your behavior is clearly understood as being the right thing to do. But it's difficult because even in George Floyd, although on video it's clear, I don't know if the right idea would be for the community members to go and try to physically stop the police officers. In fact, I know that probably wouldn't be the right idea.
Probably not.
Yeah.
And then literally within minutes after the incident took place, he's taken off to the hospital. The public begins to realize they've just witnessed something extraordinary, something that we, the untrained police audience, will look at and go, how did that happen? How could something like that happen? Within minutes, you've got the local media covering the story on radio, television, on the internet. Social media is going nuts. And the next thing you know, it becomes a shrine, a location where people start to gather and start to protest. For a police officer, what does that mean? How do you get ready for that moment?
Well, for one, recognizing that it's embedded in our Constitution, our right to peacefully protest the government. So we start there. And so the outrage, the anger, the disappointment, the fear that our community feels. That's real. And we can't ignore that or be offended by it. So it's a delicate balance because typically the police department is used to keep the peace with protests. So if you're protesting abortion or if you're protesting, saving the environment, and the police are called in to be the neutral party. But the public right now, they're protesting the police department. We are the subject of the protest. And so that creates a unique dynamic that we have to be very sensitive to. So instead of being, feeling like it's an inconvenience, I would just recommend and suggest that we embrace it. In fact, protests for the first time in my 23-year career came to the front doors of the Fremont Police Department recently.
Because of George Floyd?
George Floyd. So the actions of officers in Minnesota spread throughout the entire country. And for the first time, like I said, it came to the front door of the Fremont Police Department. And so it was a unique experience for us to have to deal with that. And so during the first protest, there was probably about 1,500 to 2,000 people that came to the front door of the police department. And they were angry, they were hurt, disappointed, all of the emotions that you would expect with a tragedy like George Floyd. So the chief and the captains, we went out to address the crowd at their request. The difficult thing for me was that I saw the faces of people who were experiencing real pain. And that hit home. That hit home for a couple of reasons. A, where I grew up, I unfortunately experienced illegal stops by the police, intimidation by the police, those type of things. And so I can understand the frustration. In fact, I was in high school in 1992 during the LA riots. So I understood the frustration. I understood why people were speaking out so viciously towards the police. But one of the things that I focused in on and where it really hit home for me is the diversity that was embedded in that crowd. You had people from different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. The protest meant something to different people. For me, as I was addressing the crowd, I focused in on a little African-American girl. She wasn't little, she was about 15. And they were chanting for us to come and join them and kneel in solidarity. And so I scanned the crowd like I'm supposed to do, but I keep going back to this little girl because she is sobbing. She is crying. And so I can't take my eyes off of her. In fact, it's an officer safety issue. I'm supposed to be scanning the crowd to make sure that everybody's being safe, but I cannot take my eyes off of her. Mm-hmm. Because in that moment, again, I'm viewing her as a person and an individual that is hurting. She's confused. She's upset. She's scared. And so it was at that moment that I closed the distance from her to her.
You got closer to her.
Yes, because they were calling for us to come and join them, and we were still talking. And so she made a comment, hey, if you won't come and join us, and we weren't opposed to doing that, would you at least come and give me a hug?
Wow.
It was at that moment that I saw my daughter and Officer Washington, Captain Washington, throw that out. Now I see my daughter, and my daughter's asking her dad for a hug. That's a situation that I cannot resist. So yeah, I went into the crowd and we embraced. And I told her it was going to be okay. And I told her, just give us a chance. Talk to me. What's on your mind? How can I help? And so to me, that's powerful for both sides of this issue. it's powerful for my police department to recognize that these are members of our community that have real feelings about what's going on in our society right now. It's also powerful for our community members to know that we too can feel their pain and understand it, because a tragedy like George Floyd should not have happened. And I understand your anger. I understand your disappointment. And we're here to try to help heal and move forward and take a giant leap forward and try to make things better. So that's one of the moments that stood out to me over the last 6 months or 3 months of the protest, is that we should embrace this dialogue. We should welcome that type of communication, because ultimately, instead of talking past or talking at each other, if we just talk to each other, we'll get a better understanding of our needs.
And that's the point about the human contact. Even though we all agreed it was a horrible thing that happened, being able to express it as a human in a badge, wearing a badge, has a lot of power at that moment. How did the crowd react when they saw you give her a hug?
You talk about, my perception, and I should be aware, but actually at that moment, I have to be honest, Bob, I was focused in on my daughter. That's what I saw. Nothing else mattered. I didn't hear what the rest of the crowd was saying. I know I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel like they were going to assault me. In fact, it seemed like the situation de-escalated. Because initially when they came to our front door, there was a lot of anger, a lot of comments, vulgarities. But after that, it seemed like it de-escalated. And so that's important. That's really, really important as we move forward, because everyone has an experience. Everyone has a background. These protests mean something different to everyone. Just like it means something different to me than it may mean to my colleague. But they're all valid, and we have to listen, and we have to embrace and talk to each other instead of at each other. So that's a long way of saying that. That's a great question, because I can't even recall what the crowd was saying at that particular moment, because I was laser focused in on what I perceived to be someone who looked like me and someone I was familiar with that was hurting at that particular moment.
Now, how did the people who you work with react to what you did? Because you were the only one who did this, right?
Yeah, I was. So it mixed reviews on it, right? Because you have some of the officers who are there, and their role is to be security for me, as well as the chief and the entire event. So it's sort of like, I knew that every once in a while, like Obama or even Trump, they would just go off the script and go towards the crowd, right? And the Secret Service would lose their mind, like, what are you doing? We can't protect you. And so, yeah, I got a few raised eyebrows, because now I was in a vulnerable position that I put myself in. But it was because my perspective was to the point where I didn't feel like I needed protection. And so because I didn't feel like I needed protection, I did put myself in a vulnerable position. Now, those officers who are there to protect and be security, they don't have my perspective. So they're just saying, whoa, my goodness, the crowd, they're throwing vulgarities, they're angry, there's some potential risk there. But I can't really condemn them for raising an eyebrow, because my perspective is my perspective, and it's my own. And so because I didn't feel threatened, or I didn't feel like I needed protection, I did kind of violate an officer's safety rule, but I felt it was worth it and in the best interest of what I felt my community needed at that particular time.
The rest of the country continued to do the protests for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was pressure on every police force in America to not explain how that could have happened in Minneapolis, but what are you going to do to make sure it doesn't happen here at home? How does that come across to you and your fellow officers?
I embrace it. I think my entire department embraces that change. So all police departments are constructed the same way. And so it may be difficult sometimes for our officers to understand that some police departments have a long way to go on this particular topic. But Bob, I got to tell you, from my background, my perspective, knowing who my father was, knowing what my expectations are of a police department, working for my particular police department, I can stand proud and with confidence and look the community in their eye and tell you that we do a pretty good job. We're not perfect. No police department is. But because we have traditionally been very proactive on these topics, we have been willing to listen to our communities, our vulnerable communities, our underserved communities. We've been positioned well to where we have been ahead of most police agencies in trying to have some of the reforms and practices and policies in place to help prevent these type of tragedies from happening. I always say there's three things that need to happen in order for us to be successful as an agency, three core things. One is we have to train our officers well. We have to invest in training. Cannot cut training budgets. We cannot, have alternatives. We have to train, comprehensive training on various topics to include race relations, to include expectations and use of force and everything that's associated with being a police officer. We also have to equip our officers with the right equipment, the equipment designed to help protect even the bad guys and gals from themselves or from the community. So less lethal weapons and using them in the appropriate manner and being accountable for their use. That's the other thing. It's not the equipment, it's the accountability and using it appropriately. But the most important thing, Bob, are the people. It's who we hire. That's the most important foundational thing that we can do is hire the right people. And what that means is extensive backgrounds, talking to friends and families, associates, scanning their social media, ensuring that their core values as much as we can. These are human beings. We're not going to be able to, they're not robots where we can just see what's on their memory. Right. But as much as we can, ensuring that their character, their integrity, aligns with the values and expectations of the community and the police department and the law enforcement profession. Those are the things that we have to do more so than anything else to ensure a successful police agency. And I can stand before you and say I'm proud that we have done that consistently throughout the years, which puts us, I think, in my humble opinion, puts us in a good position to still make some adjustments. We still need to get better. But we don't have as far as of a leap as some agencies in this country. That's my personal belief. And it's based on me being racially profiled at the hands of the police in Southern California, me experiencing illegal detentions, intimidation by the police, coming from that background. If I saw those type of things going on in my police agency, we would be on the news because I would not tolerate it at all. And so that's why I have a certain confidence about Fremont and other agencies as well. I'm just not trying to gloat about Fremont, but I try to communicate to our community members that we do hold each other accountable. And the different perspectives are important because I bring my perspective from where I grew up in my experiences to this profession, to this particular police department, to ensure that we're doing everything we can to serve the community. So
you make some very good points, and I'm going to share with you some information from former students who now work in Los Angeles, but also around the country. We got them together on Zoom during the summer of 2020, asked them about Black Lives Matter and what's going on in the country and around the world. And one of my students, former students, who's now working for a major sports magazine, had done some homework, and he was furious. He basically said, he clearly said, since the George Floyd incident in late May, we had not even gotten to August, and there had already been 100 incidents involving the police and people of color that didn't result in death in every case, but there were some that did. And I think that's the part the American people don't understand, and certainly my students don't get. If we saw what happened in Minneapolis, and if most police officers believe as you do, how could it happen again? But it did in Atlanta, and it did in other places. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It is an unfortunate truth about the profession. So here's what we know. Here's what we know. Although I don't think it is a widespread problem in law enforcement as far as racially motivated criminal acts by police, I'm not naive enough to suggest that it does not occur, because it does. Again, my background, I could have easily been a statistic if I would have moved the wrong way or, said the wrong thing. However, what makes it more of a tragedy and why the community is so outraged, and even if, you will have people come on and cite statistics about statistically, you're way less likely to be shot or injured, if you're Black or whatever by the police than other. But I throw that out because what's not factored into those statistics is the level of trust that the police that the community has granted us to serve them. So if one person, one officer uses their badge and creates criminal acts that harms the community, it might as well be 2,000 because of the impact, the betrayal that the community feels, because they give us that power. They entrust us with the ability to take someone's freedom, take someone's property, take someone's life. So that's why the statistics don't mean as much as some would want them to mean. Because again, when it happens once, it's going to feel like it happens 20,000 times, because the significance of that act and what it represents is impactful to our community. And so I try to remind my police officers and the community that I understand that. It's like if you have your closest friend and they do something to betray your trust. Deeply do something to betray your trust. That's a tough thing to get over. It's hard to start trusting friends again. You're very careful from that point forward on who you trust, right? And so it's magnified when we wear a badge and a gun and the very people we serve, we're harming. Mm-hmm. That's oil and water. That does not mix.
You made me think about, as we were talking, the brotherhood concept in the police is something like what we see on university campuses with fraternities and sororities, protecting their sisters and brothers at all costs. But they get in trouble, and sometimes they get in such terrible trouble, they're disbanded. They're told, no more, you cannot participate. As African Americans, we have the rich history of the civil rights movement to remember it was a community of Black people against an army of white people who were traditionalized to believe we were inferior. I remember my dad marching with Dr. King and having rocks thrown at him, and we were not considered human beings. So the question is basically this: have we not learned as African Americans not to believe that everybody is like the white people before the civil rights movement, or that the police department, which has some history and connection with white supremacy, has not lost their roots with that group?
Wow, that's an interesting question. We can't ignore our history. If it's good or bad, we can't ignore that history. I'm sorry if I'm using too many examples of a personal kind of connection here, but my father grew up in Mississippi. And so he was telling me stories as a young boy of how he could not use a certain restroom or drink from a certain water spigot. And the quote unquote talk that a lot of African Americans have with their young sons, his talk was quite different. His talk was, son, let me instruct you on how to walk down the sidewalk and not get yourself killed or lynched because you've looked at a white woman or you've looked at a person who has power. That's the talk that he got. My dad just died a few years ago, but he was only 72 years old. Mm-hmm. This is not ancient history that we're talking about. This is recent history. Mm-hmm. And so we have to keep that connection to understand in a very short period of time, we've come a long way. We've come a long way. But it would be foolish to believe that, as you said, how the police departments were utilized in those days, the role of the police department back then, it would be foolish to believe that we've completely eliminated that from existence, because those feelings are deep rooted in some communities. We're fortunate here in California that it's very progressive and we're more tolerant and accepting of different races and backgrounds and religious beliefs and all those other sorts of things. But there's certain parts of this country that you could rewind time back 30, 40, 50 years and you would think you would be in the 50s and 60s. And so it's important as we go forward that we recognize that, we learn from that history, and we develop policies, procedures to help guard against any of those feelings starting to creep in, because we're dealing with human beings starting to creep in and impact the way we serve the community. So yes, I do understand your point there. But, you know, from my perspective, I think it's actually a good thing for us to know our history. I know in cultural diversity, when we talk cultural diversity in policing, one of the things that I embrace is continuing to give perspective to things by having a diverse group from the community come in and talk about their experiences, talk about how they feel, what they believe in, how they grew up. That's important. And so policing in America, we're trying to achieve what policing should be. Not what it was, what it should be. And it's an evolution. And in 1992, there was a big jump. The Watts riots of the 60s, there was a jump. And there's going to be a jump right now, a big leap forward. We should be embracing that because we need to keep moving forward to try to achieve what the police department and policing should be in America. And when I say should be, there's a lot of good police departments, to include my own. But however, we need that consistency across the board because, again, George Floyd didn't live in Fremont, California. He lived in Minnesota. However, the actions of those police officers impacted how we do policing here in Fremont as well. So we need to bring everybody's level up. Mm-hmm. So for me to brag about what Fremont does is insignificant in the big picture because we need to have everybody's standards come up, everybody serve the community in a very consistent way to where we start reducing these type of incidents. We're dealing with human beings, Bob, as you know. I'm not convinced it will ever totally go away because we're dealing with human beings, but we damn near need to try. We need to get as close to that zero number as we can. Right. Even if we come up short, we'll be better tomorrow than we were today.
The point is extremely well taken because we teach students in all fields of endeavor, be at your best, be ethical, be responsible, do the job the way it was intended to be done. But the human factor gets in the way, and that can be the moment of challenge. Very quickly before we wrap up, The encounter that I had with you, with the city of Fremont and the police department, listening to the people come over the summer to our meetings, our sessions on Zoom, and share their comments was extraordinary. I thought it was impressive because I thought the public rose to the occasion and spoke their truths without fear of saying that to you. And I don't know if it was because the technology enabled it and made people relax more, or simply they were fed up and they were going to take advantage of the moment, but the people shared. How do you think your officers received that? Because my observation was you, the police officers present, were excellent at listening, excellent at responding, giving information and facts about training. The only thing that I would have loved to see more would be what you've been doing right now, the context of humanity coming through your answers. But how did you see it?
I thought it was well done as well. I really appreciated the opportunity to hear from our community members. And again, at its core, we police with the consent of the community. And that's important as a foundational way on how we deploy our resources. That community feedback is important because we use that to determine what type of policing does our community need and want in the city of Fremont. And so if every jurisdiction could do that and then use that information, not just hear it, absorb it, and put it into practice, that's what I'm talking about. We all can elevate the level of professionalism in the industry, as well as better serving our community. So yeah, I would agree with you. I think as a whole, our police officers embraced it. Some even participated, which I thought was fantastic. But listening to our community is a key component to our success. We are the community. The police are the community, and the community are the police. So more of these things, more of these interactions, I would agree with you, is fantastic. That's why, as you know, I embrace any opportunity to talk to a community member. All they have to do is call, and I'll spend 10, 15 minutes on the phone with them, one at a time if I have to. But it's because that perspective and breaking down those barriers are important. You know, the uniform automatically creates some sort of barrier. I want you to see the man behind the uniform or the woman behind the uniform to understand that we're just like you. We want to serve. We want to do the best we can for our community. We have thoughts, feelings. I've cried on duty. I've been hurt on duty. I've been worried about my family when I've been at work. I've missed a bunch of Christmases that I wish I didn't have to. But it's all been worth it because a sacrifice that I've made and my colleagues have made is for a greater good. And that's to serve our community. And I truly believe that in my soul. And I truly believe that the vast majority of officers feel exactly the way I do. So I do embrace community engagement, community action, and I do embrace and appreciate this opportunity to be with you today.
Well, I've taken up a lot of your time, and I'm going to invite you to come and on Zoom and talk to our students live in a classroom setting, because I think you are an excellent example of the communication that is the one element that I've been talking about that seems to be missing in the media. As a news person, I can tell you, I would love to hear people articulate the thoughts, the moment, the feelings, the experiences of dealing with what you deal with in a way that would help us understand the pictures. Because we teach in journalism, the pictures only tell part of the story. And you know that firsthand.
Thank you. No, I really do appreciate the opportunity, and I welcome, and I've told you this, whenever you call, I will pick up the phone, and I will
be careful.
I will do whatever you need, because I'm a Spartan through and through, and I just appreciate what you're trying to do for your students and your institution. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And like I said, when I saw you in the group session, I said, I got to talk to him, because the rapport you have with your colleagues, the way the community respected you individually, as well as your colleagues, was noteworthy and impressive. And we got to see why in this video. Thank you so much, Captain Washington.
Thank you.